My name is Maya Whitaker. I'm 24 years old, and yesterday was supposed to be the one day I didn't have to feel like the unpaid employee of my own family. I had worked a full shift, skipped lunch, answered emails from my car during my break, and kept telling myself that maybe, just maybe, when I got home, someone would have remembered it was my birthday. I wasn't expecting a party. I wasn't even expecting a cake. At that point, I would have taken a quiet dinner and 5 minutes where nobody asked me for money, passwords, bills, rides, repairs, or favors. Then I stepped out into the parking lot, reached for my phone, and saw the first message. "We sold your Tesla." For a second, I honestly thought it was some kind of cruel joke. That car was not a gift. It was not family property. I had paid for it with overtime, side jobs, and 2 years of saying no to everything I wanted. The only reason the title wasn't in my name was because I had been told it would make insurance cheaper. Then the next message came in. "You should be grateful we let you live here." I stood there under the parking lot lights, reading those words over and over while my hands went cold. Before I could even answer, another call came through, and the voice on the other end didn't sound sorry at all. "Your brother's starting college," she said. "You'll cover his first semester, $5,200. This week." I said. "Not happening." There was a pause, the kind that tells you someone expected obedience, not a spine. Then she said, "Then pack your shit. You're dead to me." I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't ask them to explain how they could sell my car on my birthday and still act like I was the selfish one. I just opened the Uber app, looked back at the empty space where my Tesla should have been, and made the first decision in years that was only for me. I left. But what happened the next morning, when I came back for the rest of my things, made the whole neighborhood stop and stare. Before I tell you what I saw on that porch, tell me this. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I want to know how far this story travels before everyone finds out what my family had been hiding. The Uber ride to my house felt longer than it really was. I sat in the back seat with my backpack on my lap, staring at my phone while the driver kept glancing at me in the mirror, like he knew I was one bad question away from falling apart. But I did not cry. I think that scared me more than anything. I had cried over smaller things before, over being blamed for a bill I did not make, over being called dramatic for asking to be paid back, over watching my younger brother Chase get praised for breathing while I got criticized for being tired. But that night, after my parents sold my Tesla on my birthday and told me to be grateful they let me live under their roof, something in me went quiet. Not peaceful, not calm, just done. When I pulled up in front of the house, the driveway looked wrong without my car in it. That empty space felt louder than any argument. I unlocked the front door with the key I had paid to copy 2 years ago because everyone kept losing theirs. And the first thing I heard was the TV blasting from the living room. My father, Warren, was sitting in his recliner with the remote in one hand and his phone in the other, pretending he was too busy to look at me. My mother, Linda, was in the kitchen wiping the same clean counter over and over. Chase was nowhere in sight, which was probably for the best, because I was not ready to look at him and be reminded that apparently his future was worth my car, my savings, and my dignity. I stood there for a second and waited for someone to say happy birthday. Nobody did. My mother finally said, "You got my message." Like she had reminded me to pick up milk, not helped sell the one thing I had worked years to buy. I asked where the money was. My father did not even turn down the TV. He said, "It went where it needed to go. Family needs come before toys." Toys. That was what he called the car I drove to work every day, the car I made payments on, the car I cleaned myself in the driveway while he joked that I cared more about that Tesla than my own blood. I said, That car was mine. He looked at me then, finally, with that hard little smile he used whenever he thought he had already won. Title was in my name, he said. You should have thought about that before acting grown. My mother whispered, Your brother needs a real start. I turned to her and said, And what do I need? She blinked like nobody had ever asked that question in our house before. My father pointed toward the stairs and said, Pack what you can carry. If you walk out tonight, do not come crawling back when life gets hard. I almost laughed. Life had been hard in that house for years. Hard was waking up early to reset the router before work because my father needed his marketplace messages to load. Hard was paying the water bill at midnight because my mother forgot it was due and then acting like it was not a big deal. Hard was setting up smart cameras, thermostats, subscriptions, phone plans, online banking, garage apps, and every single password recovery option while being called lazy because I did not also cook dinner. I walked upstairs and pulled 2 suitcases from under my bed. My hands moved fast, but my mind was weirdly clear. Clothes first. Laptop, birth certificate, social security card, work badge, chargers, jewelry from my grandmother, a folder of pay stubs, a few photos I still had not decided whether to keep. My mother came to my doorway and watched me like she was waiting for me to apologize for making her uncomfortable. She said, You are being very extreme. I said, You told me I was dead to you. She looked down and said, I was upset. Your father is under pressure. That was always the excuse. He was under pressure so he could scream. He was old school so he could control everything. He had pride, so everyone else had to shrink. I zipped my suitcase and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Under a stack of old cables was the black binder I had started building 6 months earlier. Not because I planned revenge, but because some part of me knew that one day they would accuse me of something. Page after page, it had every receipt I could find. Tesla payments from my account, insurance transfers, screenshots of texts where my mother asked me to cover electric just this once, Venmo records, Zelle transfers, marketplace payout summaries, messages from my father telling me to put a bill under my email because he did not want to deal with it, a copy of the Tesla registration showing his name on the title, and my money attached to almost everything else. I slid a USB drive into the binder pocket and put the binder back in the drawer, not hidden too well. My mother always cleaned when she was stressed. She would find it. Maybe not tonight, but soon. Then I sat on my bed and opened every app that had my name, my card, or my email attached to that house. I removed my card from the electric account and changed the contact email back to my father's. I removed myself from the water bill. I canceled the family streaming plans I paid for. I disabled my admin access on the Ring camera, the Nest thermostat, the smart garage opener, and the lights, because I had set them up under my account when nobody else wanted to learn. I paused the Facebook marketplace and offer up listings for my father's little garage flipping business because the accounts were tied to my phone number, my email, and my payout information. I did not touch a dollar that was not mine. I did not lock anyone out of their own money. I did not break anything. I simply stopped being the invisible system that made their lives easy. When I came downstairs, my father blocked the front door. He looked at my suitcases and said, Last chance. Apologize, agree to help your brother, and we can talk about letting you stay. Letting me stay. After selling my car. After demanding $5,200. After telling me I was dead to them. I looked him straight in the eye and said, Ask the family, not me. His face changed like he could not believe the machine had talked back. He stepped aside just enough for me to pass, and I walked out before my courage had time to shake. Naomi was waiting outside in her car because I had texted her from upstairs. The second I got in, she asked, Are you safe? That was the first time all night someone had asked me that. I said, I am now. But as we drove away, my phone started lighting up again. Not with apologies, not with birthday wishes, with demands. And by the time we reached her apartment, I already knew the house behind me was about to learn exactly how much of its comfort had been resting on my silence. Naomi lived in a one-bedroom apartment near downtown Plano, the kind of place that always smelled faintly like coffee, laundry detergent, and whatever candle she had decided was part of her healing era that month. She gave me the couch, a blanket, a glass of water, and the kind of look that said she wanted details but would let me breathe first. I tried to sleep, but my body would not shut down. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty driveway. I saw my father's face when he said the title was in his name. I heard my mother saying my brother needed a real start, as if I was not a real person with a real job and real bills and a real heart they had been stepping on for years. Around 6 in the morning, my phone started buzzing like it had been thrown into a beehive. First, it was the family group chat. My mother wrote, "Why is the thermostat offline?" Then Chase wrote, "Is Netflix down for everyone?" Then my father sent, "Maya, answer your phone." 5 minutes later, my Aunt Trish added, "What is going on at your house? Your mom says the cameras are not working." I stared at the messages from Naomi's couch and felt something I had not felt in years. Not joy, not revenge yet, just distance. For once, their panic did not automatically become my assignment. The smart home was not broken. It was simply no longer connected to my personal account. The subscriptions were not hacked. They were canceled because I had been paying for them. The utility accounts were not destroyed. They had been returned to the adults who owned the house. But in my family, anything I stopped doing suddenly became something I had done to them. By 7:30, my mother called 3 times. I let it ring. At 8, my father texted, "Fix the thermostat before I leave for work." I did not answer. At 8:15, Chase sent me a private message. "Dad is freaking out. He says the electric account is asking for a login. Do you know the password?" I stared at that one longer than the others. I knew exactly what had happened. The electric bill had been past due before. More than once. My father would ignore the notices because he hated dealing with online accounts. Then my mother would get anxious. Then somehow I would be asked to just put it on my card until Friday. Friday would come and go, and if I brought it up, suddenly I was keeping score. So I stopped covering it. I wrote back to Chase. It is their account. They need to reset it. He sent a typing bubble, then nothing. A few minutes later, my father called me. I let it go to voicemail. His message was not long, but every word sounded like he was chewing glass. "You do not get to punish this family because you are upset. Turn everything back on. Your brother has orientation forms to submit, and I do not have time for your attitude." I played it twice, not because I missed him, but because I wanted to hear the part where he took responsibility. It never came. Naomi came out of her bedroom with messy hair and said, "He sounds like a man who just discovered consequences." I almost smiled. Then the marketplace messages started. Since my father's little side hustle had been connected to my phone, buyers were still trying to reach me. One wanted to know if the refurbished lawnmower was still available. Another asked why the tracking number for a set of power tools had not updated. Someone else wanted a refund for a car part my father had sold but never shipped. For years, he had bragged at cookouts about his business instincts. He told people he could flip anything for profit. What he never said was that I wrote the listings, took the photos, answered the buyers, printed the shipping labels, tracked the payments, and handled the disputes. He would drag a dusty tool from the garage, say, "Put this online for me," and then act like he was building an empire. I paused every listing I could legally pause because the accounts were mine. I took screenshots of everything and saved them to the cloud. Not because I wanted to destroy him, but because I had learned that people like my father do not tell the truth unless the truth comes with timestamps. By noon, the family chat had turned ugly. My mother wrote, "Maya, this is not funny. Your father cannot access the bill account." Then my Aunt Trish wrote, "Sweetheart, whatever happened, do not make your mother suffer." That message almost got me. It was always my mother suffering, never me. Never the daughter whose birthday began with a sold car and ended with homelessness. Never the daughter expected to pay for her brother's semester because the family had already decided her money belonged to everyone. I typed, "I did not make anyone suffer. I removed my name, my cards, and my accounts from a house I was told to leave. Then I deleted it before sending." I was not ready to explain myself to people who had already chosen the version that made them feel righteous. That afternoon, Chase texted again. He wrote, "Dad says you stole the family money." I sat up so fast the blanket fell off my lap. My hands shook, but not from fear this time, from rage. I wrote, "Ask him what money. Ask him where the Tesla money went. Ask him why the electric bill was already overdue." Chase read it immediately, but he did not respond. That silence told me something. It told me the cracks were starting. My father had spent years building a house where everyone depended on me, and nobody respected me. Now the lights were flickering, the accounts were failing, the buyers were angry, and the favorite son was starting to ask questions. Naomi sat beside me and said, "You know they are going to make you the villain." I said, "They already did. The difference is, this time, I kept receipts." That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of Naomi's refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. My phone kept lighting up. Missed calls, angry texts. One message from my father that just said, "You have no idea what you are doing." But I did. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I was doing. I was not breaking their home. I was letting them live in the home they had built without me holding the walls up. Have you ever been called ungrateful by the same people who quietly depended on you every single day? Because that is the strange thing about being used. The moment you stop helping, they do not see freedom. They see betrayal. By the next morning, my father had moved from private pressure to public performance. That was his pattern. If he could not control me directly, he would recruit an audience and make himself the victim. I woke up to 7 missed calls from my mother, 3 from Chase, and 1 voicemail from Aunt Trish, my mother's sister, who had a voice that could make a church potluck sound like a courtroom. I played her message while Naomi made coffee. "Maya, I do not know what has gotten into you, but your mother is beside herself. Your father says you locked them out of accounts, took money, and left your brother's future hanging. You need to call me back and fix this before it becomes something you cannot undo." I listened to that last line again. Something I could not undo. As if selling my car could be undone. As if telling me I was dead to my mother could be undone. As if years of using me as the house manager, tech support, bill payer, emotional shock absorber, and backup wallet could be undone with one lecture from an aunt who only heard one side. I called her back because ignoring my father was easy, but ignoring Trish meant she would show up, and I did not want Naomi dragged into more than she had already been dragged into. Trish answered on the first ring. She did not say hello. She said, "What did you do?" I said, "Good morning to you too." She huffed. "Do not get smart with me. Your mother is crying. Your father is trying to keep the house running, and Chase may not be able to start school because you decided to throw a tantrum." I asked, "Did he tell you he sold my Tesla yesterday?" Silence. It was small, but I heard it. Then she said, "I heard there was a disagreement about the car." A disagreement. That word landed like a slap. I said, "He sold it on my birthday. I paid for it. He only had the title because he told me it would lower insurance. Did he tell you that part? Trish got quieter but not softer. She said, "That still does not give you the right to sabotage the family." I laughed once, and it did not sound like me. I said, "I removed my payment methods from bills. I canceled subscriptions I paid for. I took my name off accounts that should never have been mine. If adults cannot run their own house without my debit card and passwords, that is not sabotage. That is exposure." She told me I sounded cold. Maybe I did. Warmth had not protected me. Being understanding had not protected me. Being useful had only made them more comfortable taking. Around noon, Uncle Grant got involved. Grant was married to Trish, and he liked to play the reasonable man until someone embarrassed him. Then he turned into a bull in a golf polo. He texted first. "Fix what you did. Your dad cannot access the utility accounts, and your brother's tuition is due. This is family business." I wrote back. "Then the family can handle it." A minute later, he called. I answered on speaker because Naomi was sitting across from me and I wanted a witness. Grant said, "Your father tells me you are holding accounts hostage." I said, "My father tells people whatever makes him look like the injured party." Grant snapped, "You need to think about Chase." I said, "Funny, because everyone keeps saying that, but nobody has asked if Chase even wants what you are all buying for him." Grant paused. Then he said something that changed the whole shape of the story. "I gave your father money for that semester because he said things were tight. You pulling this stunt after that is disgusting." Naomi looked up from her coffee. I sat very still. I said, "You gave him money for Chase's semester?" Grant said, "Do not act like you do not know." He said everyone was contributing and you were being difficult. There it was. My father had already taken money from Grant, sold my Tesla, and still demanded $5,200 from me. It was not about Chase's future. It was about control, cash, and keeping everyone too confused to compare notes. I asked Grant, "How much did you give him?" He did not answer. Instead, he said, "I am coming over." I said, "This is not my apartment. You are not welcome here." He hung up. 30 minutes later, he was standing outside Naomi's building, calling my phone like a man who thought volume was a legal argument. Naomi went downstairs with me because she refused to let me face him alone. Grant stood near the entrance with his arms crossed, red in the face, trying to look calm for the people walking their dogs past us. He said, "You are embarrassing your family." I said, "No. I am refusing to keep funding their lies." He pointed a finger at me and said, "Your father says you cleaned out an account." I said, "I withdrew my own money from a shared savings account I should not have trusted in the first place. Every dollar is documented." He said, "Then show me." I said, "Not here. Not while you are yelling at me in a parking lot because my father sent you to scare me." He stepped closer, and Naomi moved in front of me so fast I almost cried. She said, "Back up. This is private property, and I will call security." Grant looked shocked, like he had expected me to still be the version of myself who apologized when other people raised their voices. He lowered his hand and said, "Your mother raised you better than this." That was when I felt something harden in me, I said. "My mother watched my father sell my car and then told me to pay for my brother's semester. If that is what you call raising me, then maybe I finally learned better on my own." Grant stared at me for a second, and for the first time I saw doubt flicker across his face. Not belief. Not yet. Just doubt. He left without apologizing. That evening, the family chat exploded again. My father wrote a long message about loyalty, sacrifice, and disrespect. My mother sent a crying emoji, which somehow made me angrier than words. Trish wrote, "This has gone too far." And then Chase, who had barely said anything all day, texted me privately, "I do not even know if I want college." I read that sentence 3 times. It was the first honest thing anyone in my family had said since the Tesla disappeared. I asked him, What do you mean? He typed for a long time. Then he wrote, Dad says it is an investment, but I do not want to be an investment. I just want everyone to stop yelling. That was when my anger shifted. It did not disappear, but it found a new direction. Because maybe Chase was not just the golden child standing on top of everything I lost. Maybe he was also another person trapped inside the story my father wrote for us. And maybe tomorrow, when the truth finally came out, he would have to choose whether to keep playing the role or step out of it with me. Chase showed up at Naomi's apartment just after sunset with a backpack, a hoodie, and the face of someone who had not slept much either. He had taken a rideshare and asked the driver to drop him at the gas station across the street because he did not want our father tracking where he went. That alone told me how bad things had gotten. Chase had always been protected from consequences, but not from control. When Naomi opened the door, he looked smaller than 18. Not physically, because he was taller than me, but in the way his shoulders curled inward like he was waiting to be blamed for taking up space. I almost did not know what to say to him. Part of me still saw the kid who got new sneakers while I got told money was tight, the kid who got praised for a B while I got asked why mine was not higher, the kid whose college semester was apparently worth my car. But then he looked at me and said, I did not ask them to do that. And just like that, the speech I had been preparing in my head disappeared. I let him in. Naomi gave him water and quietly went to her bedroom, leaving the door cracked because she was thoughtful, not stupid. Chase sat on the edge of the couch and stared at his shoes. He said Dad had been screaming since morning. First about the utility account, then about the buyers from Marketplace, then about Uncle Grant asking questions. He said Mom kept trying to calm everyone down, but every time she did, Dad turned on her for making him look weak. I asked if he touched her. Chase hesitated too long. My stomach dropped. He said, he grabbed her arm. Not like, not crazy, just hard. I closed my eyes. That was how our family measured harm. Not crazy. Not that bad. Could have been worse. I asked him why he really came. He rubbed his face and said, because everyone keeps saying this is about my future, but nobody is listening to me. I asked, do you want to go to that school? He shook his head. Not right now. Maybe later. I do not know. Dad picked business because he says it sounds respectable. I wanted to look into HVAC or electrical apprenticeship. Something hands-on. He says that is for people who do not have options. I felt anger rise again, but this time it was not at Chase. It was at the man who had managed to turn both of his children into tools for his ego. I said, Chase, you are not an investment. You are a person. He swallowed hard and looked away, and for a second I thought he might cry. He did not. Men in our house were taught early that tears were weakness, unless they belonged to my father and were useful in front of relatives. Chase told me Dad had been saying the Tesla money was already committed to household emergencies. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. He said, I heard him on the phone with a buyer. He sold it for less than it was worth because he wanted cash fast. I asked, cash for what? Chase shrugged. He said some went to the bank. Some went to pay Uncle Grant back, maybe. But he also saw a receipt from an auto parts place in Dad's truck. Naomi came out of her bedroom at that exact moment and said, Maya, please tell me you have copies of everything. I said, I do. Chase looked confused. I told him about the binder. Not everything, not every detail, but enough. I told him I had kept receipts because I was tired of being called selfish by people who treated my paycheck like a family resource. He asked if I was going to post it online. I said no. That was not what I wanted. I did not want strangers doxing my family or turning real pain into entertainment. I wanted the people who had judged me to see the truth. I wanted my mother to stop pretending she did not know. I wanted Aunt Trish and Uncle Grant to understand that my father had used them too. I wanted Chase to know he did not owe his life to a plan he never chose. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I think Mom might find it. She has been cleaning your room." I leaned back against the couch. Of course she had. My mother cleaned when she was guilty. She cleaned after fights, after unpaid bills, after my father said something cruel, and then acted like silence was an apology. She would fold shirts, wipe counters, organize drawers, and call that peace. If she opened the bottom drawer, she would find the black binder under the cables. And once she opened it, there would be no way to pretend she did not know. Chase asked if I was scared. I told him the truth. Yes. But I was more scared of going back to being useful. He nodded like he understood that better than he wanted to. Before he left, he asked if I hated him. That question hurt because part of me had wanted to. It would have been easier if he were just spoiled and selfish. It would have been easier if everyone in that house fit into a clean little box. But real families are messier than that. Sometimes the favorite child is not free. Sometimes the scapegoat is not weak. Sometimes the parent who cries is still responsible for what they allowed. I told Chase, "I do not hate you, but I will not sacrifice myself for you anymore." He said, "I do not want you to." It was the first time he had ever said something that sounded like standing beside me instead of above me. Naomi drove him back near the house, but not all the way. He did not want Dad seeing her car. When she returned, she found me sitting on the kitchen floor with my phone in my hand, staring at an old photo of my Tesla from the day I bought it. I remembered how proud I had been, how I had taken a picture in the dealership parking lot and sent it to my parents, hoping they would be proud too. My father had replied, "Nice, but do not forget insurance is not cheap." That was the closest thing to congratulations I got. I deleted the photo. Not because I wanted to forget the car, but because I did not want to keep a shrine to the version of me who thought love could be earned by working harder. The next morning, I decided to go back for the last suitcase I had left in my closet and a lockbox under my bed. I told Naomi I would be quick. She said, "Take me with you." I said I needed to do this myself. That was probably stupid, but I meant it. I did not know the binder had already been found. I did not know my mother had called Trish before sunrise. I did not know Uncle Grant was on his way over with printed bank records of his own. I only knew I was going back to a house that had once needed me every hour and now had no idea what to do with my absence. And when the Uber turned onto my old street, I realized the whole neighborhood already knew something had exploded. The first thing I saw was Uncle Grant's truck parked crooked across the driveway, one tire on the grass like he had stopped caring about appearances halfway through pulling in. The second thing I saw was Aunt Trish standing inside the front window with one hand over her mouth and the other holding several sheets of paper. She was crying, not the delicate kind of crying people do when they want sympathy, but the ugly kind that bends a person forward. My mother was behind her, pale and stiff, like a woman watching a storm she had spent years pretending was just weather. Then I heard shouting from the porch. My father's voice carried across the lawn, sharp and desperate, and Uncle Grant's voice came right after it, louder. "You told me that money was for Chase." My Uber driver slowed down without me asking. He looked at the house, then at me. I said, "This is fine." It was not fine. Nothing about that scene was fine. But it was real. And after years of being told I was imagining things, real felt almost holy. I got out at the curb. Two neighbors were standing near their mailbox pretending to discuss something very important about trash pickup. Another woman across the street had her dog on a leash, but the dog was sitting, so clearly nobody was going anywhere. My father stood on the porch in yesterday's clothes, phone in hand, face red, hair messy, looking nothing like the man who loved telling people he ran a tight household. He was saying into the phone, "I just need a little help until this account issue is fixed." No, she messed with the login. I am telling you, I am locked out. He saw me before I reached the driveway. For 1 second, relief crossed his face. Not love, not remorse. Relief, because the broken appliance had returned. Then his expression hardened. He pointed at me and said, "Fix this." That was it. No apology. No explanation. No happy birthday, Maya. No, I should not have sold your car. Just fix this. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Behind him, Uncle Grant was holding a page from my binder. Aunt Trish appeared in the doorway, eyes swollen. My mother would not look at me. I said, "You sold my car. You told me I was dead to you. Dead people do not fix your bills." A neighbor across the street made a sound like she had tried to swallow a gasp and failed. My father stepped down one stair. "Do not perform for these people." I almost laughed. He was standing on a porch begging neighbors for money while accusing me of performing. Uncle Grant shoved the paper toward him and said, "Answer the question." "Where did the money go, Warren?" My father snapped. "This is family business." Grant said, "You made it my business when you borrowed from me. You made it hers when you sold her car. You made it everyone's business when you blamed your daughter for bills you were already behind on." That was the first time I had ever heard Uncle Grant defend me. It should have felt good. Mostly, it felt late. I walked past them into the house because I had come for my things, and I was not leaving without them. The living room looked like someone had shaken it. Papers everywhere, the black binder open on the coffee table. My mother's cleaning basket sat beside it, which answered the question of how it had been found. The pages were spread in messy piles: Tesla payment records, utility bills, screenshots of texts, marketplace payout summaries. My father's messages, my mother's messages, a printed copy of the sale document. My birthday was written right there in the date field, like the universe wanted to underline the cruelty for anyone who missed it. Aunt Trish followed me in. Her voice cracked when she said, "Maya, I did not know." I looked at her. I wanted to say, "You did not ask." But she was crying, and I was tired, and I had learned that not every truth needed to be delivered at full force to be understood. So I said, "Now you do." She nodded, covering her mouth again. My mother finally spoke. She said, "I was going to tell you we found it." I said, "Were you?" She flinched. I hated that I still noticed. I hated that some part of me still wanted to comfort her. She said, "I did not know it was this much." I turned to her then. "You knew enough." The room went quiet except for my father shouting outside that everyone was twisting things. I went upstairs to my room. It smelled like laundry detergent and stress, exactly like my childhood. My closet door was open. My last suitcase sat half pulled out, like my mother had started to pack it and then got distracted by the drawer. The lockbox was still under my bed. I checked it, found my documents, and put it into the suitcase. Then I stood there for a second, looking at the room where I had spent years being useful, quiet, and replaceable. Downstairs, Uncle Grant shouted again. Aunt Trish sobbed. My father said my name like a curse. I carried the suitcase down one step at a time. When I reached the living room, Chase was standing in the doorway. He must have come in through the garage. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. My father saw him and said, "Tell your sister to stop this." Chase looked at him and said, "I never asked her to pay for school." The whole room froze. My father said, "Go to your room." Chase said, "No." It was one word, but it hit harder than a scream. My mother started crying then, quietly. Not because she was innocent, because even she understood something had shifted that could not be shifted back. My father turned to me again, lower this time, trying to sound controlled. "You have embarrassed this family enough." I said, "No. I think you finally embarrassed yourself." He looked around and saw what I saw, his sister-in-law crying. His brother-in-law holding proof. His wife, silent. His son no longer obedient. Neighbors watching through open curtains. Bills unpaid. Accounts unmanaged. Lies exposed. The kingdom he built on my labor had no walls left. I pulled my suitcase toward the front door. My father said, "If you leave now, do not come back." I looked at him, at the porch, at the driveway where my Tesla used to be, and at the neighbors pretending not to listen. I said, "That was the plan. After everything they said to me, how do you think they looked when they realized I had kept every receipt? I will tell you. They looked exactly like people who had spent years calling me ungrateful because they never thought I would be smart enough to prove what they took." The binder did not just expose one lie, it exposed the entire system. That was what my father did not understand. He thought he could explain away the Tesla as a family decision. He thought he could explain away the bills as temporary pressure. He thought he could explain away the $5,200 as a sacrifice every good daughter should be willing to make. But when all those pieces sat side by side on paper, with dates, amounts, screenshots, receipts, and his own words, there was nowhere left for him to hide. Uncle Grant stood in the living room reading page after page, and every time he turned one, his face got darker. Aunt Trish sat on the couch crying into a tissue, but she kept reading too. My mother hovered near the kitchen like she wanted to disappear into the cabinets. Chase stood beside the stairs, silent, but he did not leave. My father kept pacing between the porch and the living room, repeating the same phrases. "This is being taken out of context. She has always been dramatic." I was going to pay it back. Family helps family. Nobody answered him. That was the first punishment. Not yelling, not revenge speeches. Silence. The kind of silence that happens when people finally stop giving a liar the benefit of the doubt. Grant held up the page showing his transfer to my father. $3,000, labeled for Chase tuition help. Then he held up the Tesla sale document, then the marketplace payout summary, then a receipt from a specialty auto parts store dated the day after he borrowed the money. Grant said, "You told me you were short because Maya refused to help." My father said, "I was under pressure." Grant slammed the paper on the coffee table so hard my mother jumped. "No, you were spending money you did not have and selling things that were not yours to cover it." My father pointed at me. "She poisoned you against me." Grant turned on him so fast I actually stepped back. "She did not poison anything. You wrote it down for her. You sent the texts. You signed the sale. You borrowed the money. You lied." Hearing someone else say it out loud felt strange. For years, I had been the only one keeping track. I had doubted myself so many times. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe everyone helped their family this much. Maybe I was selfish for wanting my own money to stay mine. But there it was, spoken in my uncle's voice, in the middle of the living room where I had been dismissed too many times to count. "You lied." My mother finally sat down. She looked at one screenshot for a long time. It was a message she had sent me 6 months earlier. "Can you put the water bill on your card today? Your father is stressed, and I do not want to start a fight." Under it was my reply. "I can, but I need to be paid back." Under that was hers. "Why do you always make things about money?" She covered her face. I did not comfort her. That may sound cruel, but it was the first loving thing I had done for myself all week. Comforting her had always been my job. Protecting her from the consequences of what she allowed had always been my job. Not anymore. Chase stepped forward and said, "I am not going to that school this semester." My father snapped his head toward him. "Yes, you are." Chase shook his head. "No, I am going to talk to the counselor myself. I want to work. Maybe HVAC, maybe electrical. But I am not letting you use me as the reason you took her car." My father looked like he had been slapped. You are too young to understand, Chase said. I understand you called me an investment. I understand you blamed Maya when your bills were late. I understand you told everyone she ruined my future when I never asked her for anything. Aunt Trish sobbed harder. My mother whispered Chase's name, but he did not stop. He said, I am done being your excuse. That was the moment I realized the revenge was not just mine. It was the truth finally giving everyone permission to step out of the roles my father had assigned us. I was not the selfish daughter. Chase was not the perfect investment. My mother was not the helpless peacemaker. My aunt and uncle were not the wise outsiders fixing a spoiled niece, and my father was not the hard-working head of a struggling family. He was a man who had confused control with leadership for so long that he thought anything he could reach belonged to him. By late afternoon, the family group chat had completely turned. Cousins who had ignored me for 2 days were suddenly asking for copies. Aunt Trish sent a message saying there had been a misunderstanding and that nobody should accuse me of stealing. Uncle Grant replied, Not a misunderstanding. Warren lied. My grandmother called my father directly. I did not hear the whole conversation, but I heard enough. She told him that if he did not apologize and make a plan to repay what he took, he should not show his face at Sunday dinner. My father tried to argue. She hung up on him. I wish I could say that made him sorry. It did not. People like my father do not become humble the moment they are exposed. First, they become louder. He walked back onto the porch and called another neighbor, asking if they knew anyone who could help with an emergency bill payment. But by then, the story had traveled faster than he could spin it. The neighbor he asked looked past him at me, then at Uncle Grant standing in the doorway with the binder in his hand, and said, Sounds like you need to call the utility company. That was the most satisfying sentence I had heard in years. No rescue, no shortcut, no daughter running behind him with passwords and payment methods. Just a grown man being told to handle his own life. The power did not shut off that day, but only because my mother spent 2 hours on hold, reset the login herself, and arranged a payment plan. For the first time, she had to feel what I had been doing quietly for years. My father had to call a buyer and admit he could not ship an item on time. He had to refund someone. He had to ask Uncle Grant for a repayment schedule instead of another loan. He had to stand in a room full of people who no longer believed his version first. That was his consequence. Not prison, not violence, not some movie ending where everything burns. Just exposure, responsibility, humiliation earned honestly. As for me, I took my suitcase, my lockbox, and the last few pieces of myself out of that house. My mother followed me to the porch. She looked smaller than I remembered. She said, I wish you had told me sooner. I looked at her and said, I did. You called it disrespect. She cried, but I did not move closer. She asked if I was coming home. I looked at the driveway, still empty where my Tesla should have been. I looked at the porch where my father had begged neighbors for help after years of calling me dependent. I looked at Chase, who gave me a small nod from the doorway. Then I said, No. Naomi picked me up at the curb. This time, when I got into her car, I did cry. Not because I regretted leaving, because leaving finally felt real. Over the next few weeks, I froze my credit, opened new accounts, changed every password, and found a small studio I could afford if I lived carefully. Uncle Grant sent me an apology, short but real. Aunt Trish sent a longer one. My mother sent several messages, some sorry, some defensive, some trying to sound like nothing permanent had happened. I answered only the ones I had the energy for. Chase and I kept talking. He postponed college, got a part-time job, and started researching apprenticeship programs. My father never gave me a real apology. He sent one text that said, You made your point. I deleted it. Because that was the thing. I had not made a point. I had set a boundary. and boundaries feel like a tax to people who benefited from you not having any. I do not tell this story because I think every family conflict should end in walking away. I tell it because too many people are taught that love means unlimited access to their money, time, labor, silence, and forgiveness. But family should not require you to disappear so someone else can feel powerful. Helping people is beautiful when it is chosen freely. It becomes exploitation when saying no makes you the villain. The lesson I learned is simple, but it cost me almost everything to learn it. Keep records. Protect your name. Do not put your financial life in someone else's hands just because they share your blood. And never let anyone convince you that being useful is the same as being loved. Sometimes you have to let the lights flicker, the accounts fail, and the lies collapse. Not because you want people to suffer, but because they will never see the weight you carried until you stop carrying it. That was the day I stopped being my family's backup plan. That was the day my father stood on the porch begging neighbors for help. And that was the day I finally understood that walking away from people who use you is not revenge. Sometimes it is education. So tell me, have you ever had to walk away from family just to protect your own life? Share it in the comments, because someone listening right now might need the courage to set that same boundary.
Our team is working hard to create meaningful, emotional, and well-crafted stories that connect with viewers in a positive way. This is a fictional story created for educational purposes, designed to share useful lessons, valuable knowledge, and thoughtful messages with our audience. The educational value of the script lies in its message about self-respect, healthy boundaries, and financial independence. It reminds viewers that love should never be used as a tool for control, pressure, or manipulation. Through Maya's story, the audience can learn the importance of protecting their dignity while choosing truth, responsibility, and emotional strength.